I'd been back from Fort Benning for less than a week, still shaking sand out of my boots, when my sister Vicky invited me over for lunch. A proper family meal, she said on the phone. In my family, that phrase could mean anything from a genuine get-together to a full-blown interrogation with a side of potato salad. Her house in Redwood Springs looked the same as it always did, over-decorated, polished to a shine, and arranged like she was expecting a magazine photographer. Evan ran ahead of me, excited to see his cousins. I stepped into the dining room and saw Vicky at the head of the table, smiling a little too wide, like she'd just won a game I didn't know I was playing. Her husband, Grant, gave me one of those polite nods that says, "Welcome," and "Please don't touch anything" at the same time. We sat down. Small talk started, updates about work, school, the weather, the usual filler you throw out when you're not sure if the other person is here to hug you or stab you. Then, halfway through my grilled chicken, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I glanced down. It was a text from a number I didn't recognize. "Don't react, she's recording you." I didn't move my head. I just kept my fork going from plate to mouth like I was the most relaxed person in Colorado. Inside, my mind was running drills. If someone tells you not to react, you don't react. You also start quietly figuring out who in the room is playing spy. Vicky was talking about a fundraiser she'd been so busy organizing. Grant was nodding along like a bobblehead. The kids were laughing about something in the living room. I scanned the table without moving my head. A floral centerpiece sat between us, big enough to hide a Thanksgiving turkey. The flowers looked real, but were too perfect, like they came straight from a catalog. I leaned back slightly, pretending to stretch my shoulders. That's when I saw it, a tiny black dot near the base of the arrangement, just visible through the stems. A camera lens, no bigger than a shirt button. I speared another bite of chicken and smiled at Vicky like nothing had changed. She asked if I was enjoying my time off from the army. I said it was nice to have a break, though my definition of break usually meant less target practice and more paperwork. She laughed politely. Grant poured more iced tea into my glass without asking, which was unusual. He usually didn't bother. That made me even more sure this lunch wasn't just about catching up. I didn't know who had sent the text, but they clearly thought I needed the warning. I kept my voice steady as I asked Vicky about the kids' school year. She gave long answers, full of unnecessary detail, like she was buying time. I thought about every conversation we'd had in the last few months, especially the arguments about the property Dad left us. She'd been furious when he made me executor, but up until now, her anger had been more passive-aggressive than tactical. This felt different. Halfway through dessert, I shifted my attention to Evan. He was playing with his cousins, but every so often he glanced toward the dining room like he was checking in. I made a mental note to ask him later if anyone had been talking to him about me. My phone buzzed again. I checked it under the table. Same number. Smile. They're waiting for you to lose it. I took a slow sip of tea and smiled like I'd just heard the funniest thing in the world. Vicky smiled back, but her eyes flicked toward the flowers for a split second. That told me everything I needed to know. She knew the camera was there. I decided not to give her anything worth saving to the memory card. My posture stayed relaxed, my voice stayed even, and I asked her about her garden. She talked for 5 straight minutes about rose bushes and soil pH. I nodded and threw in the occasional, "That's interesting," like I was on a nature show. Evan came into the dining room to ask if we could leave soon. I said we'd head out after I finished my coffee. Grant offered me another slice of pie, which I declined. I didn't want anything else from their kitchen, not food, not drinks, not even a napkin. We wrapped up lunch with the usual polite goodbyes. Vicky hugged me at the door, holding on a little too long, like she wanted to check if I was hiding something in my pockets. I got Evan into the car, and the moment we pulled out of the driveway, I took my phone out again. The unknown number hadn't sent anything else. As we drove, Evan said Vicky had given him a cool lamp for his room. He thought it would look perfect on his nightstand. I asked him to describe it. He said it had a shiny base and a fabric shade with little stars. I nodded, keeping my eyes on the road. Back at our place, Evan ran upstairs to plug in the lamp. I stayed in the kitchen for a minute, letting him get settled, then headed up to take a look myself. The lamp was on, casting a soft glow across his desk. The base was heavier than it looked. I told Evan to grab a snack from the fridge. Once he was downstairs, I unplugged the lamp and turned it over in my hands, checking the seams and the underside. That's when I spotted the tiny panel held in place by 2 screws. Inside was a micro camera, lens aimed right where Evan's bed would be. I didn't feel shocked. I felt confirmation. That lunch hadn't been about family. It had been about bait. And I was already wondering how many other gifts from my sister had strings attached. The screwdriver bit slipped once before catching, and the tiny panel on the bottom of the lamp came loose. Inside was a black micro camera with a memory card the size of my thumbnail. No serial number, no sticker, nothing to identify it, just a lens and a little green light that told me it had power. I slid the memory card out and slipped it into my pocket. Evan came back upstairs with a granola bar, asking if I liked the lamp. I told him it was nice but maybe needed to be cleaned before we kept it in his room. He shrugged and went back to his snack. Down in the kitchen, I put the lamp in a grocery bag, knotted it twice, and stashed it in the hall closet. I wasn't ready to confront anyone yet. You don't go storming a hill until you know how many people are on it. That night, after Evan went to bed, I pulled my old laptop out of the cabinet. It wasn't connected to Wi-Fi, just a stripped-down machine I used for offline storage. I slid the card into the slot. The first file opened to a shaky shot of my kitchen from a few days ago. My voice was in the background, telling Evan to get his shoes. Then there was a close-up of me bending over the counter to sign a school form. The angle was low, almost at floor level, perfect for catching everything without me noticing. I clicked through more files. Most were short, 20 to 30 seconds, but all focused on me. Cooking, folding laundry, talking on the phone. The audio was decent. You could make out every word. One file stopped me cold. It was from 2 nights ago, Evan asking if we could visit my sister's house more often. Me saying, not until things calm down. On its own, harmless. But cut together with something else? It could sound like I was keeping him from family for no good reason. I didn't delete anything. I copied the entire card to the laptop and ejected it. Evidence stays evidence until you know how to use it. The next morning, I called Evan's school from my car after drop-off. His teacher said everything was fine but hesitated before hanging up. I asked her directly if anyone had mentioned concerns about me. She admitted there'd been a couple of questions from parents after something was shared in the community group. She didn't have details, but she said I should probably get ahead of it. I thanked her and hung up, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. I'd been gone for 6 months, and in that time, Vicky had apparently decided to build a case against me one video at a time. At home, I checked the hall closet. The lamp was still there, but I noticed the knot in the bag had been retied. Not the way I'd done it. Evan wouldn't have touched it. That meant someone else had been in my house. I walked room to room, scanning shelves, furniture, and outlets. No other obvious devices. Still, the idea that I'd missed something gnawed at me. In the living room, my eyes landed on a framed photo of Evan and me on the mantel. It wasn't straight. I picked it up, turned it over, and saw a faint scratch near the hanging wire. Not a camera this time, just a reminder that anyone could touch my things without me knowing. That afternoon, I drove to a little computer repair shop 2 towns over. The kind of place that didn't ask questions if you paid cash. I handed the guy behind the counter the lamp and told him to gut the electronics, keep the shell. He raised an eyebrow but nodded. While I waited, I sat in my car and thought about the text message. Whoever sent it wasn't just a bystander, they knew exactly what was happening in that dining room. The question was, were they trying to help me, or just stirring the pot? The repair guy came out 20 minutes later with a paper bag. Inside was the empty lamp base, the camera stripped out. I thanked him, paid, and drove home. By the time Evan got back from school, the lamp was back on his nightstand, looking completely innocent. If Vicky was expecting to keep collecting footage, she was going to be disappointed. After dinner, Evan went to play in the yard, and I sat on the back steps watching him. The sun was low, the air cooling, the kind of evening where you'd normally relax. But I couldn't shake the sense that the camera in the lamp was just one piece of a bigger plan, and I needed to figure out how many pieces there were before the whole thing closed in around me. The next time I opened my laptop, I didn't just skim through the files, I watched every single one. There were more recordings than I'd realized, some from weeks back. I'd been home less than 7 days, which meant these were planted before I even got back from Fort Benning. That wasn't just sneaky, it was premeditated. The earlier videos showed Evan doing homework, me cooking, and us eating dinner. The edits were clean, the cuts quick. Whoever was putting these together knew exactly how to make an ordinary moment look like trouble. Halfway through, I hit a clip that had me pouring a glass of wine after a long day. In reality, it was my one and only drink that week. But cut with another clip of me raising my voice when Evan tracked mud through the kitchen, it played like I was drunk and yelling at my kid. My stomach turned. If you didn't know the truth, you'd believe it. And people would believe it, especially if they were already looking for a reason. I kept clicking through and found one where I was on the phone with my friend Jenna, telling her about a bad night's sleep. The camera angle caught me rubbing my temples while saying, "I can't keep this up." In context, I was talking about laundry and grocery runs. Out of context, it sounded like I was at my breaking point. The memory card had more than just raw footage. There was a folder labeled Final. Inside were short, neatly packaged videos, each one under a minute, all with the same tone. Madison is unstable. I copied everything to a second drive, tucked it into my jacket pocket, and left the house. I didn't like the idea of all this evidence sitting in one place. I stopped at a small storage facility and rented a unit under a different name. The manager barely looked at my ID. That was fine by me. On the way home, my phone rang. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. When I checked it, there was no message, just a hang-up. That night, while I was making dinner, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was Jenna. "Hey," she said. "I don't know if you've seen it, but there's a video going around in the Stanton Elementary parents group." My chest tightened. "It's you," she continued, lowering her voice. "They're saying you might not be safe for Evan. It's you in the kitchen yelling. The clip's less than 20 seconds, but it's getting shared fast. Ein Prison." I kept my voice even. "Who posted it?" "Anonymous account. Could be anyone," she said. "But Madison, you need to shut this down before it gets ugly." After we hung up, I stood in the kitchen with the stove on low, trying to process it. I'd been in the army long enough to know that rumors can ruin you faster than a bullet. And this wasn't just about me, this was about my son. Evan came in, asking what was for dinner. I smiled, told him pasta, and sent him to wash up. My brain was already in planning mode. Whoever was behind this wasn't just collecting footage, they were distributing it strategically. I pulled up my email and logged into the Stanton Elementary community portal. Sure enough, there was a thread titled "Concerns for Student Safety." The post had no name, just a generic icon, but the video was there watermarked with the group's logo, like it was some kind of breaking news. Scrolling through the comments, I saw a mix of responses. Some parents defended me. Others were just asking questions, which is code for spreading doubt without taking responsibility. I closed the laptop and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. This wasn't just Vicky being petty. This was coordinated. The timing, the edits, the distribution, it was too precise to be random. The next morning, I parked across the street from Vicky's house. She came out in a tailored coat, talking on her phone, smiling like she didn't have a care in the world. Grant followed, carrying a leather briefcase. They got into separate cars and drove off in different directions. I stayed there for another 20 minutes, watching the empty driveway. My eyes kept drifting to the front window. The floral arrangement from the lunch was still in the same spot. For all I knew, it was still recording. When I finally drove away, I took the long route home, scanning my mirrors for a tail. Old habit from deployment, you don't assume you're alone just because you can't see anyone. Back at the house, I checked the locks, pulled the blinds, and sat at the kitchen table with a notepad. I started listing every person who could be involved. Vicky, obviously. Grant, probably. But who else? Someone had to be editing the footage. Someone else was running the anonymous account. And then there was the person who sent me the text during lunch. Evan came in with his backpack and dropped a permission slip on the table. I signed it, smiling like everything was normal, but my mind was already 5 steps ahead, running scenarios, thinking about how you dismantle an enemy when you're not even sure how many there are or how close they've already gotten. I grabbed my old deployment rucksack from the closet and pulled out the field inspection kit I hadn't touched since leaving Fort Benning. Most people keep cleaning supplies under their sink. I keep a nonlinear junction detector, a handheld RF scanner, and a flashlight with a UV filter. Years in the Army teach you that sometimes your worst threats are the ones quietly watching you. Starting in the kitchen, I scanned every outlet, every smoke detector, and every picture frame. The RF scanner lit up twice, once near the router, which was normal, and once at the coffee maker, which was not. I pulled the coffee maker forward, flipped it over, and found a tiny microphone taped to the underside. Not expensive, but enough to pick up conversations from anywhere in the room. I sealed the mic in a plastic evidence bag and moved on. The living room was clear, except for a faint ping near the bookshelf. Turned out to be a Bluetooth tracker, shoved between two novels. That one made me laugh. Cheap, obvious, but still effective if you're tracking someone who doesn't check their stuff. Upstairs, Evan's room was my main concern. The lamp was already gutted, but the scanner still chirped near his window. I pulled back the curtains and found a small Wi-Fi camera stuck to the inside frame, painted white to match the wood. The lens faced directly at his bed. I felt my jaw tighten as I unscrewed it, bagged it, and checked the rest of the room. No other signals, but I wasn't betting on it staying that way. In my bedroom, the scanner pinged near the ceiling fan. That one took effort. I had to climb on a chair, remove the housing, and pull out another camera, this one with night vision capability. That told me whoever planted it didn't just want to hear me. They wanted to watch me, even when the lights were out. By the time I finished the sweep, I had 4 devices bagged and labeled. That was in addition to the lamp camera I'd already neutralized. 5 total. All planted without my knowledge, and all within the past week. I sat at the dining table with the pile in front of me. If this were a training exercise, the next step would be figuring out how they got in and how often they were coming back. I decided to set a trap. Using the lamp's empty shell, I installed a dummy camera of my own, one that looked real but was actually wired to alert me if it was moved. I put it back in Evan's room exactly where it had been. Then I moved on to the front door. I added a thin line of clear tape along the inside frame, positioned so it would tear if the door opened even slightly. I did the same with the back door and the garage entry. Before bed, I checked every lock twice. Evan thought I was just being Army Mom again, but I didn't explain. No point worrying him. Around 2 a.m., I woke to a faint creak from the hallway. I stayed still, listening. No footsteps, no voices. The tape on the bedroom door was intact. I waited another minute before getting up, checking the hall and finding nothing. In the morning, while Evan was getting dressed, I quietly inspected the door traps. The one on the back door was torn. The dummy lamp camera had been rotated slightly. That meant someone had been inside while we slept. Evan came downstairs asking if we could get donuts before school. I said sure, grabbing my phone and wallet like nothing was wrong. As soon as we were in the car, I locked the house from my app and set the security system to silent alert mode. After drop-off, I called a locksmith I trusted from my National Guard days. He came within an hour, changed every lock, and added deadbolts to the back and garage doors. Standing in the driveway, I looked at the pile of bagged devices in my rucksack. This wasn't random, this was methodical. And the person or people behind it knew my routines well enough to walk in and out of my home without leaving a trace, except for what I was now catching on purpose. If they thought they were still 2 steps ahead, I was about to prove they were already behind. The locksmith's van had barely turned the corner when I decided to stop waiting for answers to come to me. If this was a coordinated hit, someone was coordinating it, and I had a pretty good guess where to start. Vicky's husband, Grant, worked with a mid-sized law firm in downtown Redwood Springs, Langford and Myers, LLP. They handled everything from real estate disputes to messy custody battles. If there were legal strings being pulled in the background, chances were good the threads ran through that office. I walked in like I had an appointment, wearing my old civilian blazer and carrying a manila folder. Reception barely glanced up before asking if I was there for a consultation. I said yes, gave a fake name, and took a seat in the corner. 10 minutes later, a young woman with dark hair and sharp eyes stepped out from behind the glass door. "I'm Alicia," she said, extending a hand. Her grip was firm, like she was used to holding it together in a room full of lawyers. We sat down in a small conference room. I started with my cover story property dispute, possible surveillance from a relative. She listened, nodding in the right places, but her gaze kept flicking to the folder in my lap. Finally, she leaned back and said quietly, "You're Vicky's sister." It wasn't a question. I didn't confirm, but I didn't deny it either. She smirked slightly. Thought so. You should probably know, people talk here, more than they should. I asked what she meant. She hesitated, then glanced toward the door before lowering her voice. Some of the partners have been unusually interested in certain personal cases, ones that don't actually involve our clients, at least not officially. I stayed silent, letting the pause hang. She shifted in her chair. Look, I'm not saying I know everything, but I've seen emails, drafts, things that don't belong on company servers. If you were smart, you'd check what's been moving through our internal accounts the past few weeks. I told her I didn't exactly have access. She tapped her pen on the table, then stood up. Wait here. A few minutes later, she returned with a plain USB drive, sliding it across the table like it was a receipt. I'm not giving you this, she said. I'm forgetting it on the table while I step out for coffee. She left without another word. I slipped the USB into my pocket, waited 30 seconds, then got up and walked out the front door like nothing had happened. Back in my car, I locked the doors before plugging the drive into my offline laptop. The root folder had a single directory named Project M. Inside were dozens of emails, mostly between Grant and 2 other partners. The language was careful, but the meaning wasn't hard to figure out. They were building a case file on me, selectively edited video, witness statements from unnamed sources, and even a draft psychological evaluation I'd never taken. Each document was time-stamped, showing the plan had been in motion for months. Scrolling through, one email jumped out. Ensure primary subject is recorded in high-stress environments. Triggers improve reliability of negative behavior patterns. All data to be stored off-site. Legal team will handle admissibility later. I closed the laptop and sat there, gripping the steering wheel. Triggers meant they weren't just catching bad moments, they were trying to create them. Before I left the parking garage, I saw Alicia through the lobby window, returning with her coffee. She glanced out toward my car and gave the smallest nod before disappearing inside. I didn't know her angle yet, whether she was helping me out of principle or because she had her own axe to grind, but right now, she was the first person in this whole mess who hadn't been working against me. And that meant she was worth keeping close. The more I read, the clearer it became that Project M wasn't some casual side hustle, it was a full-scale operation aimed directly at me. Every email, every attachment, every note was about one thing: making sure I looked unfit to raise Evan. The earliest message dated back to 3 months before I even came home from Fort Benning. It was from Grant to a man named Brandon Kerr. I didn't recognize the name, but the email signature marked him as a family law consultant. That was a polite way of saying fixer. The message was short. Proceed with the asset. Primary subject will be in controlled environment for the next quarter. Prepare baseline. Baseline. That meant surveillance. Establishing what my normal looked like so they could contrast it with the chaos they planned to create later. Other emails outlined opportunities to collect footage. Me arriving home tired from drills, Evan being upset about missing a school event, me raising my voice during homework. All normal parenting moments, but framed in the right way. They could be spun into evidence of instability. There was a spreadsheet, too, with columns for event, location, trigger, and result. Under trigger, they listed things like fatigue, family tension, and Evan discipline. Under result, they wrote phrases like verbal escalation or emotional withdrawal. One file was a proposed custody petition. It read like a nightmare version of my life. Claims that I was emotionally volatile, prone to angry outbursts, and unable to provide a stable home environment. There were quotes attributed to me that I'd never said, and there were witness statements, signed only with initials, probably people I knew but couldn't identify from the letters alone. I scrolled further and found an outline labeled Phase 2. That's where things got ugly. Phase 2 involved public corroboration, meaning the release of edited clips into community spaces, just like the one Jenna had warned me about. The idea was to build a chorus of concern, so that by the time a legal filing happened, the court would already believe I was the problem. Then there was Phase 3, which was 1 sentence long. Execute custody transition within 72 hours of order. No details, no logistics, just an assumption that they'd win and Evan would be moved out of my home before I could fight back. By the time I closed the last document, my hands were tight on the laptop like I might crush it. I'd faced ambushes before, but they were always from people I expected to fight me. This was my own family. I took a breath, then opened a new notepad file and started listing names: Vicky, Grant, Brandon Kerr. The initials from the fake witness statements: JL, PR, HC, anyone with a possible connection. I left Alicia's name off. For now, she was the only reason I had this information at all. The memory of that lunch came back to me, Vicky smiling, talking about fundraisers, the camera in the flowers catching every move. It wasn't just surveillance, it was staging. They wanted to catch me slipping, but if I didn't slip, they'd create something that looked like I had. I printed the most damning emails and hid them in a fireproof box in the attic. Then I stashed the USB in my storage unit alongside the drives from the lamp camera. I didn't trust my house to hold anything important anymore. On the drive back, I kept thinking about Brandon Kerr. I pulled over in a strip mall lot and did a quick search on my phone. His name came up: fast consultant in Denver, with a reputation for handling sensitive family matters discreetly. Translation: the guy you hire when you want results without caring how clean they are. Scrolling through, I found a photo from a charity golf event. Standing next to Brandon was Vicky, grinning like she'd just aced the 9th hole. I leaned back in the driver's seat. There it was, the connection between my sister and the man building the case to take my son. This wasn't going to be about convincing them to stop. This was going to be about proving, without a shadow of a doubt, that they were the ones crossing every legal and ethical line in the book. And if I did it right, they wouldn't just lose their plan, they'd regret ever starting it. I parked a block away from the Redwood Springs Country Club and walked the rest of the way. It was the same place where that charity golf event had been photographed. If Brandon Kerr had ties to my sister beyond consulting, this was the kind of venue where they'd overlap social circles wrapped in money and mutual favors. The front desk clerk didn't ask too many questions when I signed in as a guest under a made-up name. Country clubs are funny like that. If you look like you belong, they assume you do. Inside, I scanned the lounge. No Brandon, but I recognized one of Vicky's friends, a tall blonde named Meredith, who never met a secret she couldn't share if it meant she got to be the center of attention. I caught her eye and walked over. "Meredith," I said, smiling like we were still on good terms. She hesitated, then smiled back. "Madison, I didn't know you were back." "Just a short visit," I said. "Heard Vicky's been busy. Fundraisers, new projects." Her expression shifted just enough for me to know she wanted to talk, but also wanted to look like she wasn't talking. "Oh, she's always busy," Meredith said. "And she's got new friends. Very professional." I leaned in a little. "You mean Brandon Kerr?" Her eyes widened. "You know him?" "Not well," I lied. "What's his deal?" Meredith lowered her voice. "He's around more than Grant is lately. Not in that way, exactly, but they meet up a lot. He's the one who got her into that family safety nonsense. Said it was about protecting Evan, but it sounded more like a sales pitch for something bigger. That was enough for me. I thanked her, excused myself, and headed for the bar. The bartender was wiping down glasses and gave me a polite nod. I ordered a soda and asked casually, "Does Brandon Kerr still come in here much?" "Couple times a week," he said. "Usually with your sister. Big tipper. Always talking business, not golf." I didn't press for details. Bartenders don't like feeling pumped for info. But now I knew Kerr wasn't just a consultant. He was embedded in her life enough to be part of her routine. On my way out, I passed the events board and spotted a flyer for an upcoming Veterans Gala. The list of sponsors included Langford and Myers LLP, and right below it, Kerr Strategic Solutions. I snapped a photo. If both Brandon and Grant were connected to that event, it was a perfect place to see who else was in their network. Back in my car, I called Alicia. I kept my voice neutral but direct. "How deep is Kerr in with your firm?" "Too deep," she said without hesitation. "He's not officially on payroll, but he's in meetings he has no business being in, and your sister's name comes up a lot more when he's around." I told her about the gala flyer. She was quiet for a second, then said, "If you're going, don't go alone." The rest of the afternoon was spent on background work. I pulled Kerr's business filings, cross-checked them with event sponsorships, and found that nearly all of his charity involvement overlapped with organizations tied to Vicky's social crowd. The more I dug, the more it looked like Kerr had been handpicked for this job, not because of his skills, but because he could operate in her world without raising suspicion. One detail stood out. Kerr's company had billed Langford and Myers for special investigative services 3 months ago. The invoice amount was large enough to cover weeks of surveillance. That put the start date for Project M exactly when Grant's first email suggested. By the time I closed my laptop, I wasn't just looking at a family feud anymore. I was staring at a network, Vicky, Grant, Kerr, and likely others working together under the cover of legal consultation and community outreach. If I wanted to take them down, I needed more than proof they were spying. I needed to show they were doing it with intent to manipulate a custody decision. And that meant getting inside their world just enough to watch them operate in real time without them realizing they were the ones being watched. The night of the Veterans Gala, I traded my jeans for a black evening dress I hadn't worn since an army banquet 2 years ago. It wasn't about looking glamorous, it was about blending in. These events are full of handshakes, staged smiles, and quiet deals in the corners. If I walked in looking like I didn't belong, I'd stand out. The Redwood Springs Civic Hall was dressed to impress flags draped from the rafters, white tablecloths, and a stage set for speeches that were more about networking than patriotism. I checked in at the entrance, gave the name of an acquaintance from my National Guard days, and stepped inside. I spotted Vicky almost immediately. She was wearing a deep green gown, champagne glass in hand, working the room like she owned it. Kerr was next to her, leaning in close as she laughed at something he said. Grant was nearby, shaking hands with a city council member. The three of them looked like a power trio in a political ad. I moved along the edges of the room, collecting fragments of conversations. Custody reform, family safety initiatives, community guardianship, all vague enough to sound noble but pointed enough to make my skin crawl. Near the silent auction table, I ran into Alicia. She looked different in an evening dress, but her expression was the same, alert, taking in everything. "You shouldn't be here," she murmured without moving her lips. "Too late," I said. "What am I looking for?" She nodded toward the far corner, where a group of men in tailored suits stood around a high table. "That's the core. Kerr, 2 of our senior partners, and a guy from Child Advocacy Network. If they're planning anything big, that's where it's being discussed." End footnote. I grabbed a glass of water and drifted closer. I didn't have to hear every word, body language was telling enough. Kerr was doing most of the talking, leaning in with his hands flat on the table while the others nodded. One of the partners glanced toward Vicky, then back at Kerr. Kerr gave the slightest nod in return. That tiny exchange told me they weren't just here for charity. They were here to solidify whatever they'd been building against me. A few minutes later, the MC called everyone to take their seats for the speeches. I ended up at a table 2 rows from the stage, with a clear view of Kerr and Vicky across the room. The keynote was a local politician talking about protecting our most vulnerable, which drew polite applause. Then Vicky took the stage. She started with the usual platitudes about community and family, then pivoted to a story carefully vague about a child in our circle who wasn't in a stable environment, and how difficult choices had to be made for his safety. I kept my expression neutral, but my nails dug into my palm under the table. She didn't say my name, but she didn't have to. Anyone in her circle would connect the dots. Halfway through her speech, I noticed Kerr pull out his phone and glance at it. Then he slipped out a side door. That was my moment. I excused myself from the table and followed, keeping enough distance that I could duck behind the hallway's decorative columns if he turned. He walked toward a smaller side room marked staff only and swiped a keycard. The door clicked open, and he stepped inside. I caught it before it closed and eased it open just enough to see. Inside, Kerr was at a laptop on a small catering table, scrolling through what looked like video thumbnails. I recognized the layout. It was the same file structure from the USB Alicia had given me. He opened one clip, and I saw myself on screen, in my kitchen, leaning over the counter. That was enough. I pulled out my phone and snapped 3 quick photos, making sure the screen, Kerr's face, and the open file list were all in the frame. I backed away before he could turn around, returned to my table, and finished my water like I hadn't moved. When the speeches ended, I slipped out before anyone could corner me. I didn't have the whole picture yet, but I had a new piece of it, proof that Kerr was still in active possession of the edited videos and using them in a supposedly unrelated public setting. On the drive home, I replayed Vicky's speech in my head, She was already planting the narrative in front of people who could influence community opinion. Kerr was in the back room holding the so-called evidence, and the whole event had been dressed up as patriotism and charity. If I'd learned anything from the army, it was this: you don't always win by charging the front line. Sometimes, you win by collecting intel until the other side doesn't realize the fight's already shifted in your favor. Tonight, I'd shifted it. The morning after the gala, I set my coffee on the counter and spread out the photos I'd taken of Kerr in that back room. Each image was clear enough to read the file names on his laptop. That meant timestamps, and timestamps meant I could match his files to the devices I'd already pulled out of my house. But instead of rushing to confront him, I did what any trained recon officer would do. I started mapping his network. Step 1 was digital. I pulled my old Army-issued tablet from storage, the one I'd kept wiped and offline for situations exactly like this. Using the metadata from the photos, I created a grid showing the dates, file names, and camera sources. It didn't take long to realize something important. The files weren't coming from just my house. One folder was labeled School Drop, and the thumbnails showed me in my car parked outside Stanton Elementary. Another folder, Gymmetry, had clips of me walking into the base gym footage I didn't even know existed. That meant their surveillance wasn't limited to break-ins. They had people or devices tracking me in public, and if they were sloppy enough to label the folders like that, there was a good chance they were using multiple operators. Step 2 was physical. I drove to Stanton Elementary just before dismissal and parked down the block. Instead of waiting for Evan, I scanned the street. Sure enough, there was a black SUV I'd seen parked near the school twice before. This time, the driver was a man in his late 40s, wearing sunglasses despite the overcast sky. He wasn't holding a phone, but a small dash-mounted device blinked faintly on his dashboard. I walked past the SUV like I was heading for the corner store, glancing just long enough to clock the plate number. By the time I circled back, the SUV was gone. At home, I called a contact from my guard unit, who now worked in private security. He ran the plate and called me back an hour later. Registered to Kerr Strategic Solutions, he said. That was the confirmation I needed. Kerr's company wasn't just advising my sister, they were actively running surveillance on me in multiple locations. The next move was bait. If they wanted footage of me losing it, I'd give them something. On my terms. I set up one of my own cameras in the living room high enough to catch the entire space and staged a conversation with Jenna on speakerphone. I raised my voice just enough to make it sound heated, pacing the room and gesturing like I was upset. But every few seconds, I'd slip in phrases like fake evidence and planting cameras and Kerr's little project. If anyone was listening through a live feed, they'd have just heard me name-drop the operation in the middle of their supposed proof. That's the kind of contamination that makes lawyers nervous. 2 days later, I noticed the black SUV again, this time parked near the grocery store while I loaded bags into my trunk. I made sure to talk loudly on my Bluetooth headset about meeting with an attorney and leaking everything to the press. That night, the SUV didn't just vanish. It was replaced by a white sedan I didn't recognize, parked 1 block from my house. Subtle, but not subtle enough. I jotted the plate number, just in case. By the end of the week, my own cameras had picked up 2 separate people approaching my property at night. 1 man, 1 woman, both wearing gloves and hats low over their faces. Neither stayed long, but each lingered near the spots where I'd originally found devices. They were checking their gear. That was the mistake I'd been waiting for. Every time they touched something, my own sensors logged it. Now I had dates, times, and physical descriptions tying their people to the illegal entry of my home. I uploaded the files to a secure cloud drive only I could access, then printed still frames to keep in my locked box. This wasn't just self-defense anymore. This was building a counter case. If Vicky and Kerr thought they could run a clean operation while making me look dirty, they were about to find out what happens when the target knows the playbook and starts running her own plays right back at them. 2 mornings after my staged argument with Jenna, the first crack showed. I was making coffee when Alicia texted, "We have a problem. Kerr's people are spooked." I called her immediately. She spoke low, like someone might be listening. "There was a closed-door meeting last night, Grant. Kerr, 2 partners. Brandon was furious. He thinks someone leaked details about the project. He told them to Pause public exposure until they know where the breach is. I let that sit for a second. Good, I said. That gives me room to move. They're also changing the drop points for the footage, she added. He doesn't want anything sitting on servers anymore. It's all being moved to encrypted drives. Physical handoffs only. That was even better. Physical handoffs could be tracked. That afternoon, I positioned myself 2 tables away from Vicky at the Redwood Springs cafe she liked for casual meetings. I had my laptop open, pretending to work, but my attention was on her conversation with a tall man in a gray coat. He handed her a small padded envelope under the table. She slid it into her purse without looking. I gave it 2 minutes, then packed up and left circling the block until I saw her car pull away. I fell in behind her, keeping 2 vehicles back, just like we'd been trained in convoy shadowing. She drove straight to Kerr Strategic Solutions' office, stayed inside for less than 10 minutes, and came out empty-handed. By the time I got home, my security contact had already run the gray coat guy's plate, another Kerr employee. The next day, the community portal lit up again. A concerned parent posted a blurry still image of me from a supposed video, claiming I had anger management issues. But this time, the comments weren't one-sided. Several parents pushed back hard, demanding proof, pointing out that anonymous posts aren't reliable. Jenna jumped in too, writing, "I've known Madison for years. This is targeted harassment. Whoever is posting this should be ashamed." It wasn't just moral support, it was the first sign that the smear campaign was losing its grip. If they couldn't control the narrative online, they'd have a harder time selling it in court. That night, Alicia called again. They're blaming each other. Grant thinks Kerr got sloppy. Kerr thinks someone inside the firm is feeding you intel. And Vicky. She hesitated. Vicky's trying to distance herself, publicly at least. Meaning? I asked. She told the partners she's just concerned as a sister, and that she's not involved in any legal action yet. But I've seen the drafts. She's neck deep in it. It clicked, then they were preparing to throw each other under the bus if things went sideways. That kind of fracture could be exploited, but only if I kept the pressure exactly where it hurt most. So I stepped it up. The following morning, I mailed an anonymous envelope to Kerr's office. Inside, a single still frame from my own surveillance, showing one of his operatives tampering with the fake lamp camera in Evan's room. Across the bottom I'd printed, "Trespassing is still a felony. No return address." By noon, Alicia texted, "Whatever you sent, it worked. Brandon's losing it. Pulled 3 people off the project entirely." But the real shift came 2 days later. I was walking Evan to the car when Vicky's SUV pulled up half a block away. She rolled down the window just enough to call out, "We need to talk." I kept my voice even. "About what?" Her eyes flicked toward Evan, then back to me. "Not here. Not now. End of 12. I didn't answer. I just got in the car and drove off. If she wanted a meeting, she was going to have to come to me on my terms and in a place where I controlled the ground. Back home, I updated my notes. Their public exposure phase was stalled. Their network was spooked. And now, my sister was breaking formation and trying to make personal contact. The funny thing about an operation falling apart from the inside is that the people running it often don't realize it until they've already lost control. By the look in Vicky's eyes this morning, I could tell she was starting to see it. The morning after Vicky's drive-by attempt at a conversation, I decided to set the terms myself. I texted her one line. "If you have something to say, meet me at the Fairmont Diner at 2 p.m. today. Alone. Alder." The Fairmont was perfect public enough to keep things civil, but with enough background noise from the lunch rush that nobody could record clean audio without obvious equipment. I arrived 10 minutes early, took the booth against the wall with a clear view of the door, and ordered coffee I had no intention of drinking. Vicky walked in right on time, sunglasses still on despite the cloudy afternoon. She slid into the booth, set her purse down carefully, and leaned forward. I didn't want it to go this far. I kept my tone flat. It didn't go this far on its own. She exhaled, looking down at her hands. "You've been unstable since you came back from the army. People are concerned." I almost laughed. "People? Or you and the 2 men you've been paying to build fake evidence?" Her eyes snapped up. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Not." I reached into my bag, pulled out a single printed photo, the one of Kerr at his laptop during the gala, with my kitchen on the screen, and slid it across the table. She didn't touch it, but her jaw tightened. "Here's what I think," I said quietly. "You wanted Evan because you decided you could raise him better. You found a consultant who knows how to make people look bad on paper. And you thought you could run the whole thing without me knowing until the court date." And before. Her silence was all the confirmation I needed. "You're not getting him," I said. "Not through lies, not through edited videos, not through backroom deals. The next time one of your people steps foot on my property, I'm calling the police and pressing charges. And if you want to test how much I can prove, keep going." For a moment, she just sat there, tapping one nail on the table. Then she smiled, but it wasn't friendly. "You think you're smarter than me. You always did." End quote. "No," I said, standing. "I just know how to finish what I start." I left her sitting there, the untouched coffee cooling between us. Back home, I called Alicia. "She's rattled," I told her. "But she's not pulling back. If anything, she's going to double down." "That's fine," Alicia said, "because now I can do something I've been holding off on. There's an internal memo Kerr sent it to Grant last week. It outlines the whole strategy point by point. If I can get it out of the system without triggering an audit, you'll have enough to bury this thing." "Do it," I said. "And make sure you cover your tracks." While I waited, I prepped my own next step, contacting a lawyer I trusted from a past guard case. I sent him a summary of everything: the devices, the surveillance, the internal files, the staged social media posts. I told him I wasn't ready to file yet, but I wanted him ready when I was. By late evening, Alicia delivered. She emailed me a password-protected file with the memo attached. It was worse than I'd imagined: bullet points detailing behavior amplification tactics, instructions for editing video, for maximum judicial impact, and even a section on social reinforcement, which was code for planting stories in the community. At the bottom, in plain text, was this line: "Final execution will be coordinated between Vicky L. and Brandon K. Pending legal readiness from GL." Those initial Grant L. sealed it. This wasn't suspicion anymore. It was documented conspiracy. I printed the memo, locked it in my evidence box, and leaned back in my chair. For the first time since that text at lunch weeks ago, I felt like I had the high ground. If they wanted to see how far I'd go to protect my son, they were about to find out. And this time, the battlefield was one I'd chosen. 2 days after Alicia sent me the internal memo, I sat at my kitchen table with every piece of evidence spread out like a tactical map. Photos of Kerr's laptop, stills from my own surveillance cameras, screenshots of community posts, and now, the memo, my ace in the hole. The key wasn't just having the evidence. It was arranging it in a way that told the story clearly to anyone, judge, jury, or reporter, without them having to connect dots. If you make people work to see the truth, you've already lost. I called my lawyer, Mike Hanley, and told him I was ready to meet. We sat in his downtown office, a quiet place with thick carpets that muffled the sound of traffic. I laid out the materials in order, explaining where each came from and how they connected. He didn't interrupt, just kept making small marks on his legal pad. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. "This is bad for them," he said. "Very bad. You've got illegal surveillance, attempted character assassination, conspiracy to manipulate a custody case. If even half of this is authenticated in court, they're in deep trouble." "That's the plan," I said. He nodded slowly. "We'll need to get an independent digital forensics team to verify your files. Once that's done, we can use their own timeline against them." That phrase stuck with me, their own timeline. Because the memo, the emails, the footage, they'd all been time-stamped by them. The more they documented their plan, the easier it was to prove intent. Over the next week, I worked with the forensics team like we were on a covert op. They imaged the USB, my hard drives, even the printed files, cataloging everything with chain of custody records so there'd be no chance of it getting tossed in court. At the same time, I started feeding select pieces of non-sensitive information back into their own ecosystem. Anonymously, of course. One night, a still frame from my camera showing Kerr's operative by the lamp appeared in a private Facebook group for local parents. Another day, a heavily redacted snippet of the memo landed in an email inbox of a reporter known for covering legal corruption. The effect was immediate. Alicia texted me, "Kerr's losing control. Vicky's panicking. Grant's saying it's not worth the risk anymore. But I wasn't going to let them quietly walk away and pretend nothing happened. They'd built their case on edited clips meant to make me look unstable. So I took those same clips recovered from the files and played them in full, unedited, showing exactly what happened before and after their evidence. For example, one clip they labeled "Violent Outburst" started with me raising my voice in the kitchen. But the full version showed Evan spilling a pot of boiling water, me yelling in panic for him to move, and then comforting him once he was safe. Their edit had cut out everything but the yell. I stitched together 3 of these before and after examples into a clean, time-stamped video. Then I sent it anonymously again to a group of local veterans I knew from my guard unit. Word travels fast in those circles. By the weekend, whispers about Vicky's dirty custody play were circulating in the exact social network she'd relied on to back her story. The final move in this phase was legal. Mike filed a formal preservation request with Kerr Strategic Solutions and Langford and Myers, demanding they retain all records, footage, and communications related to me or Evan. It was the legal equivalent of pointing a spotlight into their hideout and saying, "I see you." They had 2 choices now: comply and hand over the very files that would destroy them, or refuse and look guilty. Either way, the noose was tightening. That night, as I locked the evidence box in my closet, I realized something important. I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was dismantling their entire operation piece by piece, using the tools they'd built for my destruction. It was the kind of reversal they'd never see coming because until now, they'd assumed I was just reacting. They didn't know I'd been running my own operation all along. The first ripple hit on a Tuesday morning. I was jogging past the coffee shop near the courthouse when I noticed 2 of Vicky's usual friends huddled over a phone, whispering. I didn't slow down, but I caught one phrase, "full videos." By noon, Alicia confirmed it. "Someone leaked the unedited footage," she said over the phone. "It's everywhere in their circle. People are starting to realize they've been fed garbage." That was the opening I needed. I'd been careful up to now, letting the truth drip out in controlled doses. But the thing about a controlled burn is that eventually, the fire takes on a life of its own. Mike and I decided to go one step further. We arranged a private screening at his office for a few key community figures, people who'd been most vocal against me in the early days. We showed them the edited clips side by side with the originals. No narration, no dramatic music, just the plain difference between reality and what Kerr's team had presented. By the end, one of the women who'd signed a concerned parent letter actually apologized. Another said flat out, if they can do this to her, they can do it to anyone. Word from that room traveled fast. By Thursday, a city council member who'd been friendly with Vicky publicly posted about misinformation campaigns targeting veterans and mothers. He didn't name her, but he didn't have to. The pressure cooked harder when the reporter I'd slipped the memo snippet to finally called. "We verified enough to run a piece," she said. "Not naming minors, but the rest is fair game. They won't like it." The article went live the next day. It laid out the network without using my name, detailing how a family safety initiative had been weaponized to manipulate a custody case. Kerr's name was in the headline. Vicky's appeared in the 4th paragraph. The blowback was immediate. Kerr Strategic Solutions locked their social media pages. Langford and Myers issued a vague statement about ongoing internal reviews. And Vicky, well, she called me. "You think you've won?" she said, voice tight. "I don't need to win," I replied. "I just need the truth out. You've embarrassed me in front of everyone." "No," I said. "You did that yourself." I hung up before she could answer. That afternoon, Mike forwarded me an email from Kerr's attorney, accusing me of illegally obtaining proprietary materials. Mike's response was 3 lines long. "Our client has ample evidence these materials were generated through illegal surveillance. We will not be intimidated." Privately, Alicia told me the firm was fracturing fast. Grant was lobbying to cut Vicky loose to save his own position. Kerr was threatening to take everyone down if they turned on him. It was a perfect storm of panic and mistrust, exactly what happens when a conspiracy starts to collapse in public view. The best part was, I didn't have to push anymore. Every time they tried to defend themselves, they tripped over another lie. When Vicky claimed she'd never authorized any recordings, someone dug up a photo from the gala, showing her walking into the staff room Kerr had been using as his base. When Kerr insisted the footage was publicly available, the reporter posted screenshots of the memo's instructions for hidden device placement. By Saturday, the conversation in the community had completely flipped. The same people who'd once looked at me with suspicion were now asking how I was holding up, offering to testify on my behalf if it came to that. I didn't need their pity, but I took their offers. Every statement was another nail in the coffin they'd built for themselves. That night, I sat at my desk and went through the evidence one last time, checking for gaps. The story was airtight now. If they wanted to fight it out in court, I was ready. If they wanted to disappear quietly, I was fine with that too, as long as they stayed out of my life and my son's Averly TPO. Either way, the control they'd worked so hard to have was gone, and the more they scrambled in public, the less they'd have left to fight with when it counted. By Monday morning, the storm was still raging, but for once, I wasn't in the middle of it. I was above it, watching it burn itself out. Mike called early to say Kerr's attorney had gone quiet after the last exchange. No new threats, no follow-up demands. That usually meant they were regrouping or cutting losses. I wasn't going to wait to find out which. After Evan left for school, I drove to the county courthouse, with the evidence box locked in my trunk. Inside, I filed 2 motions. One for a restraining order against Kerr and any employee of his firm, and one for a protective order to bar Vicky from any direct or indirect surveillance of me or my property. Filing them in person wasn't just about speed, it was about making sure there was no clerical delay that could be exploited. The clerk stamped both sets of paperwork, and I walked out into the cool morning air with a weight I hadn't realized I'd been carrying for months starting to lift. That afternoon, Alicia called. "Kerr's gone," she said. "Packed his office last night. No goodbye email, no explanation, just gone." "Voluntary?" I asked. "Hard to say, but Grant's telling people he's restructuring to focus on legitimate contracts." She paused. "I think they're trying to make this disappear without admitting anything." "They can disappear all they want," I said, "as long as they stay gone." The next day, the reporter published a follow-up. It was short, just a few paragraphs noting Kerr's sudden departure and the firm's internal changes, but the tone made it clear this wasn't a graceful exit. Vicky didn't call me again. Instead, she sent a short email. "I hope you're happy. We're done." I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say that wouldn't drag us both back into the mud. Some battles aren't worth fighting once you've already won the war. That evening, Evan and I went for ice cream. It was the first time in weeks I'd taken him out without scanning every car that passed or every face in the crowd. He didn't know all the details, just that things had been messy and were now better. That was enough for him. Back home, I put the evidence box back in the closet, still locked. I wasn't naive enough to think this chapter meant I'd never have to use it, but for now, it could stay there. Later, sitting on the porch with a mug of tea, I thought about the whole chain of events. How it started with one text at a family lunch and ended with me dismantling an entire operation. How they'd underestimated the discipline I'd learned in the military, the ability to stay patient, to act only when the moment was right, to never let the enemy dictate the terms. People assume revenge is about striking back fast and hard. Sometimes it is, but the kind that lasts, the kind that sticks, isn't about the strike at all. It's about making sure the other side can never rebuild what they tried to use against you. That's what I'd done here. Kerr's reputation was in tatters. Vicky's credibility was gone in the circles that mattered. And most importantly, Evan was safe. As the streetlights flicked on, I realized I wasn't thinking about them anymore. I was thinking about tomorrow, about normal mornings, about school drop-offs without tailing cars, about coming home without checking the shadows. Holding the line had taken everything I had. But now the door was closed, and I was the one who got to decide whether it ever opened again. Looking back, I realized this was never just about winning against Vicky or Kerr. It was about proving to myself that I could protect my life, my son, and my integrity without becoming the person they tried to paint me as. The Army taught me to keep my head when the ground shifts under my feet, but this was a different battlefield. Here, every move was personal. They tried to corner me with lies, but every lie left a trail, and I knew how to follow it. They thought I'd break under pressure, but I used that pressure to sharpen every decision until there was no room for error. In the end, the real victory wasn't in the paperwork or the public fallout. It was in walking through my front door at night, knowing no one was watching from the shadows, and hearing my son's laughter without the weight of what might be lurking behind it. Some fights change you. This one reminded me exactly who I am and why I'll never let anyone take that from me.